"Read page 3, I said, sliding the envelope across the Thanksgiving table. "Go ahead. Read it out loud." My mother-in-law's hand trembled as she picked it up. 22 relatives sat frozen around that table, turkey going cold, wine glasses forgotten midair. 10 minutes earlier, she had stood up in front of everyone and announced that my husband was being cut out of his father's will. She smiled when she said it. She actually smiled. She wasn't smiling anymore. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit the like button now. If you've ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you, comment here below. And subscribe to Story Retribution because today's ending proves that karma always arrives, just not when people expect it. I need to take you back to the beginning because you need to understand exactly who I was dealing with. I married into the Whitfield family 8 years ago. My husband, Daniel, was the middle son of Eleanor Whitfield, a woman who ran her household the way some people run empires, with charm in public and control in private. The Whitfield family had money, old money, built by Daniel's late father, a man named Richard, who spent 30 years growing a chain of regional pharmacies before he passed away 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack. I was a labor and delivery nurse. Not glamorous, not wealthy, but steady, honest work that I loved. Eleanor never let me forget the difference between us. At every family dinner, she found a way to mention Daniel's older brother's wife, who came from a very established family, or his younger sister's fiancé, who was going to be a surgeon. Me, she introduced simply as Daniel's wife, the nurse, like my name wasn't worth the extra syllables. I let it go. I always let it go. I loved Daniel. I loved our daughter, Sophie, and I had learned a long time ago that some battles aren't worth fighting in someone else's dining room. But Eleanor didn't stop at me. Eventually, she started targeting Sophie. The small betrayal happened last spring, at Sophie's 7th birthday party. Eleanor arrived late, handed Sophie a gift, and then spent the entire party comparing her to her older cousin, loudly in front of the other children. "Emma's already reading chapter books," Eleanor said, watching Sophie struggle through a simple picture book someone had brought as a party game. "Some children just develop a little slower, I suppose. Nothing to be ashamed of." Sophie's face fell. She was 7. She didn't need to be measured against her cousin at her own birthday party. I bit my tongue, smiled, and redirected the game, but I remembered it. I remember everything Eleanor does. It's a habit nurses develop. You learn to watch closely, document quietly, and wait for the moment the pattern becomes undeniable. The bigger betrayal, the one that changed everything, began about 4 months ago when Richard's estate finally finished probate. Daniel and his 2 siblings were supposed to inherit the pharmacy chain equally, exactly as their father's will specified. I had seen the will myself, years earlier, when Richard was still alive and proud enough to show us the document over dinner one night, joking that he wanted no fighting over it later. But 4 months ago, Eleanor called a family meeting and announced that a updated will had been found, one that left the majority of the estate to her, with Daniel receiving almost nothing, citing vague reasons about financial responsibility and family values. Daniel was devastated, but too respectful of his mother's grief to push back hard. His siblings, especially his older brother Preston, seemed suspiciously comfortable with the new arrangement. Something felt wrong to me immediately. Richard had been sharp as a tack until the day he died. He wasn't the type of man to suddenly reverse a decision he'd been proud of for years, especially not without telling Daniel directly. I started asking quiet questions. As a nurse, I had worked alongside estate lawyers before during patient consultations, and I remembered enough about probate law to know that updated wills, discovered conveniently after a death, especially ones that benefited the person presenting them, deserved real scrutiny. I reached out to an old friend from nursing school whose husband was an estate attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh. I explained the situation carefully, without accusing anyone outright, just laying out the facts. Gerald agreed to review the documents if I could get copies. Getting copies wasn't hard. Eleanor, arrogant as always, had left a folder of estate paperwork sitting on the kitchen counter during a visit, confident nobody would ever question her. I photographed every page with my phone while pretending to help clear dinner plates. Gerald's findings, when they came back 3 weeks later, confirmed what I suspected. The updated will had a signature that didn't match Richard's authenticated signature, from earlier legal documents. The witness signatures on the new will belonged to 2 employees at Eleanor's country club, both of whom, according to public records Gerald pulled, had no notary credentials whatsoever, which the will falsely claimed. And the date on the document placed its signing 3 days after Richard had already been hospitalized, unconscious, following his heart attack, a fact confirmed by hospital records I was able to access properly through Daniel as next of kin. Eleanor had forged the will after Richard was already incapacitated. She had stolen from her own son while he grieved his father. I didn't confront her immediately. I gathered everything: the forged document, Gerald's forensic handwriting analysis, the hospital records, the notary fraud evidence, into one clean, organized file, the same way I chart a patient's history, methodically, without emotion, ready for anyone who needed to review it. I decided to wait for the right moment. And Eleanor, without knowing it, handed me that moment herself. Thanksgiving arrived, hosted at Eleanor's enormous house, the whole family gathered around her long mahogany table. Sophie sat beside me in her favorite purple dress, excited about pumpkin pie, blissfully unaware of the storm building around her. The public humiliation scene came right after the turkey was carved. Eleanor stood, tapping her wine glass for attention, and I felt my stomach tighten because I already sensed what was coming. "I have an announcement," Eleanor said, beaming at the table. "As you all know, the estate has been finalized. I want to be transparent with the family." She looked directly at Daniel, then at me, then, cruelly, at Sophie. Richard's true wishes reflected concern about financial stability in certain branches of the family. Daniel's inheritance has been adjusted accordingly. I'll be managing the majority share going forward, as your father wanted. The table went quiet. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, still too respectful, still too hurt to fight back at his mother's table. Then Eleanor added the line that changed everything. "Some of us simply weren't raised to handle that kind of responsibility," she said, glancing pointedly at me. "Nurses' salaries are lovely, dear, but running a pharmacy empire requires a different kind of upbringing." Sophie, sitting beside me, looked up and asked quietly, "Mommy, why is Grandma being mean to you?" That was the line I needed. Not Eleanor's insult toward me. I could have absorbed that forever. But my daughter noticing it, my daughter asking why, that was the moment the silent preparation ended and the hidden plan began. I stood up calmly, no raised voice, no trembling hands. "Eleanor," I said, "before everyone finishes dinner, I think the family deserves to know the truth about that updated will." Eleanor's smile flickered. "Excuse me? You said Richard's true wishes were reflected in that document," I continued. "But Richard never signed it. Not while conscious, anyway." The table shifted. Preston, Daniel's older brother, set down his fork slowly. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor said, her voice sharpening. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the same clean, methodical presentation I'd built over weeks. I placed the first document on the table. "This is a forensic handwriting comparison," I said, conducted by a certified analyst, comparing Richard's authenticated signature on his original 2019 will to the signature on the document you presented 4 months ago. According to this report, they don't match. "That's absurd," Eleanor snapped, but her hand had gone very still. "This," I continued, placing a second page down, "is the hospital admission record from Cedar Grove Medical Center, showing Richard was admitted unconscious 3 days before the date listed on the updated will. He never regained consciousness before he passed." A collective gasp moved down the table. "Wait, what?" Daniel's younger sister, Claire, whispered, staring at the papers. "And these," I said, laying out the final 2 pages, "are public records showing the 2 witnesses on the new will, the same ones who supposedly watched Richard sign it while unconscious in a hospital bed, are employees at your country club with no notary license, despite the document falsely stamping them as certified notaries." Eleanor's face drained of color entirely. She reached for her wine glass and missed it. "You had no right," she said, her voice shaking now, "to go digging through private family matters." "You had no right," I said, To forge your dying husband's signature and steal his son's inheritance while pretending it was his wish. The room was dead silent. I turned my phone toward the table and pressed play on a recording I had saved from a conversation weeks earlier, one I had captured, legally, during a follow-up call with Eleanor about estate questions, where I had asked innocent-sounding questions and she, confident and careless, had said too much. Eleanor's own voice filled the dining room. Richard was already gone by the time the papers were seen. It doesn't matter. He would have wanted this eventually anyway. The recording ended. Nobody moved. "Mother," Preston said slowly, staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "Is that true?" Eleanor said nothing. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, no sound coming out. Then Claire stood up. "I knew something felt wrong," she said quietly. "I asked you about the notary stamps months ago, and you brushed me off. I should have pushed harder." She looked at me. "Thank you for actually doing something about it." That was the moment the last silent supporter switched sides. The family's own accountant, a distant cousin named Walter, who had been quietly hired by Eleanor to review the estate, stood up from his seat near the end of the table. "For the record," Walter said, clearing his throat nervously, "I raised concerns about that will's documentation months ago. I was told to stay quiet or lose the account." He looked directly at Eleanor. "I have my original email flagging the notary issue if anyone needs it. I kept a copy. I didn't feel right about what happened." Eleanor sat frozen at the head of her own table, pale, silent, the woman who moments earlier had humiliated a nurse and a 7-year-old girl now unable to produce a single word in her own defense. The family reactions came in waves after that. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom, how could you do this? To me? To Svi?" Eleanor still said nothing. Preston stood and walked to my side of the table. "I'm sorry," he said to me directly. "I let this happen because it benefited me too. That's on me. We're fixing this. Tonight." Gerald, my attorney friend, had prepared exactly for this outcome, giving me a card weeks earlier in case things escalated. I placed it on the table in front of Preston. "He specializes in estate fraud," I said. "He already has copies of everything. The forensic report was filed with a certified probate examiner 3 days ago in case anyone tries to make evidence disappear tonight." Eleanor's shoulders sagged, finally understanding there was no version of this evening where she walked away untouched. The emotional resolution unfolded slowly around that Thanksgiving table, the way real reckonings often do, not with shouting, but with quiet, devastating clarity. Sophie, confused by the tension, but sensing something important had happened, tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, are we okay?" I knelt beside her chair and smoothed her hair back. "We're more than okay, sweetheart," I said. "Sometimes grown-ups make big mistakes, and tonight we made sure the truth came out. That's a good thing." Daniel knelt beside us too, his hand on Sophie's shoulder, his eyes still on his mother, a lifetime of complicated feelings passing silently across his face. He didn't yell at her. He didn't need to. The silence in that room said more than any shouting match ever could. By the end of the night, Preston had already called the family's actual, original attorney to begin the process of formally contesting the fraudulent will. Claire sat with me at the table long after most guests had quietly excused themselves, apologizing for every time she'd stayed silent while her mother belittled me over the years. "I always saw it," she admitted. "I just never said anything. I'm sorry." "You said something tonight," I told her. "That's what matters." Eleanor was the last to leave her own dining room, sitting alone at the head of the table long after everyone had gone quiet or left entirely, staring at the documents that had unraveled years of careful manipulation in the span of 15 minutes. I didn't feel triumphant. Walking Sophie out to the car that night, her small hand in mine, pumpkin pie mostly untouched on her plate back inside, I felt something steadier than triumph. I felt like a weight I'd been carrying quietly for months had finally, fully set itself down. The final lesson settled over me on the drive home, watching Sophie fall asleep in the back seat, exhausted from a holiday that had turned into something far bigger than turkey and pie. Eleanor had spent years assuming my silence meant I had nothing to fight back with. She mistook my patience for weakness. My quiet dignity for something she could walk over again and again at every dinner, every birthday, every family gathering. She never imagined that the nurse she dismissed as beneath the family had spent her entire career learning how to watch closely, document carefully, and wait for exactly the right moment to present the truth. I never raised my voice at that table. I never called her cruel, never listed years of insults out loud. I let 4 pieces of paper and 1 recording do what years of biting my tongue never could. Karma doesn't announce itself with anger. It doesn't arrive the moment you want it to. Sometimes it waits patiently, gathering evidence in a quiet folder until the exact moment someone stands up at their own table and underestimates you one final time. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, emotional drama, shocking revenge, and the justice that always finds its way back, subscribe to Story Retribution and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. Tomorrow's story might be even more unbelievable. See you then.